Montana Territory. Late autumn of 1874, the mountain wind howled low through the cottonwoods as Laurel Ashby stood alone on the edge of the prairie cemetery. Her gloved hands wrapped around a bundle of dried wildflowers, the ground beneath her boots frozen hard. She had been waiting by the grave for hours. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the wooden crosses and rough-hewn stones. Her black dress clung to her in the wind, and though she was shivering, she did not move. The grave before her belonged to her older brother, Samuel Ashby, buried only 3 days ago. Shot during a cattle dispute outside Bozeman, the same land dispute that had taken her father 2 winters back. There was no one left now but her and her little boy, Wyatt, 6 years old. Bright eyes, quiet voice. He was waiting back at the small cabin, watched over by the widow from 2 homesteads over. Laurel had promised she would only be gone an hour. That had been before noon. Now the sky was darkening and she still could not walk away. Then she heard the horse. The sound was soft at first, hooves muffled by the packed dirt trail. She did not turn until the rider slowed. When she looked up, the man was already dismounting. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusted brown coat that hung to his thighs. A hat was pulled low over his eyes, and in his gloved hand he held a small bunch of fresh-cut prairie flowers, white, yellow, and soft blue. "Laurel," he said carefully, voice low and warm from disuse. "You been out here all day?" She blinked once, her lips parting, but no sound came. The man stepped closer. "It's me, Truett Palmer." He pulled the hat back, and something in her chest pulled tight. She remembered that face, older now, lined from sun and wind, but still the same Truett who had lived down by the creek when they were children. The same Truett who had kissed her once behind the barn when she was 17, before he rode off to Texas and never came back. Until now. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice unsteady. He looked down at the grave. "He was my friend too. I heard what happened. I rode up from Red Lodge as soon as I could." Laurel stared at the flowers in his hand. "Those for him?" He hesitated, then held them out to her. "No, these are for you." Her breath caught. "I figured you'd be here," he added quietly. "You always came when it mattered." She took the flowers slowly, her fingers brushing his. "You should not be out here alone," he said, his voice soft. "It's near freezing." Laurel looked away toward the grave. "I could not leave him. I do not know how to say goodbye this time." Truett nodded. "Then do not yet. I will stay. You do not have to do that. I know." He stepped up beside her, silent, and together they stood as the last orange light slipped below the horizon. The wind picked up, and without a word, he pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Laurel did not argue. They stayed as the night came on, stars scattering above them. He did not talk much, and neither did she. Now and then, he would glance at her, his eyes gentle, like he was watching something he had not seen in a long time and was scared to lose again. When the moon rose high, she sank to her knees at the grave, the coat still wrapped around her. Truett knelt beside her, resting one hand lightly on her back. "I thought you were never coming back," she whispered. "I thought so too," he admitted. "But I could not forget you." She looked at him, her eyes shining faintly in the moonlight. "I was 16, she said, "when you left. I remember. You wore that green dress with the ribbon tied wrong in the back." Laurel let out a soft, broken laugh. "I was not good at ribbons. I liked that about you." They sat there in silence after that, the cold forgotten, time slowing down. Then she leaned against his shoulder, and he did not move away. She stayed like that until the first bird called in the distance and the frost began to glint on the grass. When she finally stirred, he stood and offered his hand. She took it. "Let me take you home," he said. "You and Wyatt." Laurel blinked. "You know about Wyatt, I heard." "Samuel wrote me last winter." Laurel hesitated. "He is all I have left." "No," Truett said. "You have me now, too." There was a stillness between them, a quiet, certain kind. Then she nodded. They walked back toward her horse together, the dawn just beginning to color the sky behind them. The walk back to the cabin was quiet, the frost crackling beneath their boots as the sky paled above the peaks. Laurel's fingers clutched the reins while Truett led the horse, his hand steady on the bridle. Her borrowed coat still held a trace of his warmth, and though the cold nipped at her cheeks, she felt steadier than she had in days. The lantern in the window was still lit when they reached the homestead. Laurel stepped onto the porch, pausing at the door. "I'll see to Wyatt," she said, her voice tired but sure. Truett gave a slow nod. "I'll tend the horse." She opened the door and slipped inside. The warmth of the hearth met her, and the scent of wood smoke and dried sage lingered in the air. "Mrs. Norrie was nodding off in the rocker, her knitting pooled in her lap. Laurel touched her shoulder gently. "He's still sleeping," she whispered. Mrs. Norrie stirred, blinking. "Didn't make a peep all afternoon. I left a bit of stew warming." "Thank you." Laurel walked into the small back room. Wyatt lay curled beneath a quilt, his breathing soft and even. She sat beside him, brushing a curl from his brow. He shifted, one hand reaching for hers in his sleep. When she returned to the main room, Mrs. Norrie was putting on her shawl. "I'll be heading back now," the older woman said. "Snow's coming." Laurel helped her with the door. "I'll bring bread by in the next day or two." Mrs. Norrie gave her a look that lingered. "You're not alone, child, not anymore." Laurel didn't answer, just watched her step into the pale dawn. Outside, Truett was brushing frost from the horse's back with a folded rag. Laurel stepped off the porch and stood beside him, her arms folded across her chest. "You always this quiet?" she asked, her voice low. He glanced at her, then went back to the saddle strap. "Only when it matters," she tilted her head. "And when it doesn't, then I talk too much," she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've changed. So have you." They stood there for a moment, the silence not uncomfortable, just full. She watched him work. His movements were practiced, calm. He seemed older than his 30-some years, not from age, but from the weight he carried. "You staying in Red Lodge long?" she asked. He didn't look up. "I was just passing through." "Plan to winter in Idaho." "So why are you still here?" He straightened, dusting his hands on his trousers. "Because you didn't write me off," she blinked slowly. "I thought you'd forgotten us." "I didn't. I just didn't know how to come back." She held his gaze. "You still don't." "But you're trying." Truett's jaw shifted. "I can fix the porch steps, and the fence by the creek's pulling loose from the posts. Those things don't hold up without a man tending them." Laurel's mouth tightened. "I've managed." "I know you have." "I'm not saying you haven't." He reached for the saddle again, but she put a hand on his arm. "You can stay here," she said. "There's the lean-to out back, still has a cot." He looked at her for a long moment. "You sure?" She nodded. "If you're willing to pull your weight, you can stay as long as you like." Truett's eyes softened. "Then I'll get started after breakfast." She turned back toward the house. "I'll heat the stew." He followed her to the porch, and for the first time in months, the wind around the cabin didn't feel so heavy. Inside, Wyatt was stirring, and the kettle began to whistle faintly from the stove. Laurel ladled the stew into a pair of tin bowls while Truett crouched to add kindling to the firebox. She watched him quietly, noticing the way he moved through the space not like a stranger, but like someone easing back into a place he'd once known by heart. As they sat down to eat, Wyatt padded into the room barefoot, rubbing his eyes. He paused when he saw Truett, then looked to his mother. "This is Mr. Palmer," Laurel said gently. "He's going to help with the chores." Wyatt nodded slowly, then climbed into her lap. Truett offered a small smile. "You're taller than I expected." Wyatt didn't answer, but he didn't hide his face either. Laurel kissed her son's temple. "He takes his time with people." "I understand that," Truett said. The boy reached for a biscuit, and for a while the only sounds were the clink of spoons and the low crackle of the fire. Afterward, Truett stepped outside to split wood. Laurel watched him from the window, her hands sunk in the dishwater, steam curling around her wrists. There was no sudden lightness in her chest, no instant relief, but there was steadiness, and that, for now, was enough. The snow arrived 3 days later, soft and slow, building in silence until the cabin roof held a thick white cap and the fence rails wore narrow shoulders of frost. Laurel stepped out early with a pail in hand, steam rising from the water she'd drawn. The cold bit through her shawl and stung her cheeks, but she moved steadily, boots crunching through the layer of snow that had hardened overnight. Truett had already been out since dawn. She saw him near the barn, sleeves rolled up, guiding the new calf into the stall with a length of rope and firm patience. The wind caught at the brim of his hat, and his breath came in clouds as he crouched to check the latch on the gate. She crossed to him, setting the pail near the post. "She's nursing. Stubborn, but she took," he said without looking up. "The mother's spooked, but I think she'll settle by nightfall." Laurel leaned against the stall's edge. You always handle animals like they've known you a long time. I figure they don't like shouting any more than people do. She glanced down at his hands, raw from the cold and work. You could have stayed in town, found easier ways to pass the winter. He stood and met her eyes. I didn't come for ease. They held each other's gaze for a breath too long before Laurel turned toward the house. Wyatt set on making a snow lantern. You'd be wise to stay close, or he'll rope you into it. I've built worse things with less convincing. Later, she found them both crouched by the edge of the woodshed, packing snow into hard balls and stacking them in a circle. Wyatt's nose was red and his mittens soaked through, but his grin was wide. Truett moved slower, not in any hurry, his coat dusted white as he shaped the snow with a quiet focus. "Laurel," Wyatt called, "we need a candle for inside." She fetched one from the kitchen, and when she brought it out, Truett struck a match against a stone and lit the wick. The glow flickered through the snow like fire behind frosted glass. Wyatt leaned close, his voice hushed. "Looks like a fairy lives in there," Laurel touched his shoulder. "Maybe one does." That night, after Wyatt had gone to sleep with the quilt pulled to his chin, Laurel sat by the hearth, mending a tear in her only good dress. Her needle moved slowly, the lamplight catching on the thread. Truett came in from the barn, brushing snow from his sleeves, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "Wind's shifting," he said. "Might bring more by morning," she nodded, eyes on the fabric. "We've got enough stores to last a week if it comes to that." He didn't sit right away. Instead, he walked to the window and stood there, one hand resting on the sill. "I passed through here once before, about 4 years back. You never stopped." "No, I saw your father at the feed store. He didn't see me. I wasn't ready." Laurel's needle paused. "And now," he turned to face her. "Now I want to stay." She tied off the thread and set the dress aside. "You sure it's not just the snow talking?" Truett came closer, pulling the empty chair nearer to hers. "I've been in towns where folks don't know me from the next man. I've ridden fence lines that stretch farther than I could see, and I've never once felt what I feel here." "What's that?" He reached for her hand, slow and careful, as though asking permission with the motion. "Like I'm part of something that could last." Laurel studied his face, the quiet sincerity in it, then she laced her fingers with his. "I've carried a lot alone, Truett," she said. "I don't know how to set it down all at once." "You don't have to," he said. "Just let me walk beside you while you do." The fire popped gently. Outside, snow fell steady and thick, but inside the cabin, the air held a rare kind of stillness, the kind that came when something long buried began to bloom. Laurel leaned against his shoulder, and he rested his cheek to her hair. Neither of them spoke again that night. They didn't need to. By late December, the snow had hardened into drifts that clung to the hillsides and filled the low creek beds. The wind had quieted some, though it still whistled through the eaves just before dusk. Inside the cabin, the days took on a rhythm Laurel hadn't known she'd longed for. Truett had built a small table for Wyatt in the corner, carving the legs himself from pine he'd dragged in from the ridge. Laurel watched him work as she kneaded dough, her sleeves rolled to her elbows and her hands dusted with flour. "You always build with your hands first," she said without looking up. "I was never much good at drawing plans," Truett replied. "I figure the wood tells you what it wants to be if you listen close enough." Wyatt sat nearby, arranging twigs into a little fort. "Can wood talk?" he asked. Truett set down his plane. "Not the way we do, but it remembers storms and heat and where it grew." "That's another kind of talking." Laurel turned toward them, wiping her hands on her apron. "What do you suppose this cabin remembers?" Truett's eyes met hers. "Loss, and now something after." The bread rose slow in the oven. Laurel stepped outside to shake out the rug, the cold biting into her skin. Truett followed a few minutes later, carrying 2 chipped mugs filled with broth. She took one without speaking, standing beside him on the porch. The clouds had cleared just enough to show the far ridgeline, blue against the pale sky. "Did you ever think you'd stay put?" she asked. He sipped from his cup. "I tried once down near Laramie, took work hauling freight. Thought I'd find something steady, but I never stopped looking west." "What changed?" He glanced at her, then back toward the trees. "I stopped looking." Laurel sat down on the top step, her knees drawn up. "I used to think if I just worked hard enough, the ache would go quiet. And did it?" No, but it got smaller when someone shared it. Truett lowered himself beside her. Their shoulders brushed and neither moved away. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, she said. But I know I want it to be honest. Truett waited a moment before answering. Then we'll build it that way, piece by piece. The next morning, he took Wyatt out to teach him how to track rabbits by the fence line. Laurel stayed behind, stringing dried apples and humming under her breath, a sound she hadn't made in years. When she looked out the window and saw Truett kneeling in the snow, his finger tracing tiny prints for Wyatt to follow, something in her steadied. That night, she laid a second quilt across his cot in the lean-to. She didn't speak when she did it, and he didn't mention it when he saw it only nodded once and closed the door behind him with care. The days lengthened as the new year approached, though the cold still held. Laurel found herself laughing more, not loudly, but with that quiet fullness that stayed in her chest. One evening, as she shelled beans by the fire, Truett sat nearby, carving notches into a length of oak. "What are you making now?" she asked. He didn't look up. "A keepsake box. Thought maybe you'd need a place to put letters or buttons or whatever don't have a proper home." Laurel set her bowl aside and crossed to him. She watched his hands move over the wood, his thumb brushing the edge to smooth it. Then very gently she rested her hand over his. He stilled. "I think I've got a place for you too," she said. Truett looked at her, and whatever loneliness had lived in his eyes softened into something steady. He turned his palm upward and linked their fingers together, slow and certain. "You've had it all along," he said. Laurel leaned in and pressed her forehead to his, her voice barely above a breath. "Then stay." And he did. By late February, the snow softened underfoot, melting slow along the south-facing slope behind the barn. The creek had begun to whisper again, water moving beneath thin ice like something waking after a long sleep. Laurel stood at the edge of the field with a basket in one hand and her shawl drawn snug against her neck. She watched Truett and Wyatt walk the fence line, one tall and measured, the other quick and full of questions. The quiet that had once felt like loneliness now belonged to something else, something settled. That evening, she brought the last jar of preserved peaches down from the loft. Truett was cleaning his boots by the stove, his back to her, and the firelight caught the curve of his jaw and the slope of his shoulders beneath his flannel shirt. She set the peaches on the table and cleared her throat, a sound small but purposeful. "I've been thinking," she said. He didn't look up right away. That always leads to something. She folded her apron and set it aside. "We've been moving careful around each other, like we're waiting for something to go wrong." Truett stood slowly, turning to face her. "I don't want to rush you. I'm not asking to be rushed," she said. "I'm asking to be seen for who I am now, not the girl I was before you left." He crossed the room, stopping just short of touching her. "Then let me be clear. I see a woman who's held steady through things that should have broken her, who raised a boy with more kindness than this world usually allows, and I've never wanted anything as much as I want to stand beside her." Laurel's throat tightened, but she held his gaze. "Then do it." He reached for her hand. "Marry me." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she stepped into his arms, resting her forehead against his chest. For a long moment, they swayed there together, the sound of the fire the only thing that marked time. A week later, they stood beneath the cottonwood behind the cabin, just as the last of the snow melted into the earth. Mrs. Norrie held Laurel's bouquet while Wyatt clutched Laurel's other hand, his boots polished and his hair combed flat. Truett's voice didn't waver as he spoke. Laurel's eyes didn't leave his face. They were wed by the preacher who came up from town once a month, his voice scratchy but kind, his hands trembling as he pronounced them man and wife. Afterward, they ate cornbread and cold roast and passed around a jug of cider. Wyatt fell asleep in the crook of Truett's arm before the sun was down. That night, after the dishes were washed and the hearth swept clean, Laurel lit the oil lamp by the bed. She turned to find Truett watching her, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his expression quiet and sure. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere again," he said. "You do now," she told him. "You always did." He crossed the room, brushed a piece of hair from her cheek, and kissed her with the kind of care that came from knowing what it meant to lose and find again. They lay together as the wind moved softly over the cabin. No words were spoken. None were needed, The months passed and the earth turned green again. Wildflowers pushed their way up through thawed ground. Laurel planted beans, carrots, and onions. Truett built a henhouse with Wyatt's help, and every morning the boy ran out barefoot to check for eggs. In the evenings, Laurel read aloud by lamplight while Truett carved small wooden animals for Wyatt's growing collection. They talked of adding a second room to the cabin, of trading for a milk cow come summer, of what name they might choose if the baby Laurel now carried turned out to be a girl. One late afternoon in June, Truett came in from the field with dirt on his hands and sweat at his collar. Laurel met him at the door, her belly rounding beneath her dress, her face flushed from kneading bread. "Storm coming," he said, glancing at the sky. "I know," she replied, pulling him inside, "but we're ready for it." And they were. Come autumn, they would have more to harvest than just crops. They would have a daughter named Clara, born with Laurel's steady eyes and Truett's quiet strength. They would raise her beneath the same cottonwood where they wed, in a home built not just of wood and nails, but of patience, trust, and the kind of love that does not ask to be spoken, only lived. They slept each night with the peace of people who had found what they needed. Not ease, not perfection, but a life built hand in hand, full of small comforts and deep knowing. The wind still came, and winter always followed fall, but now there was warmth enough to meet it. And they never wanted for more.